And now to the U.S., where the man behind two attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump, Ryan Wesley Routh, has been charged with two firearm offenses in federal court. If convicted on the charges, he could face a maximum sentence of 20 years. Mr. Routh, who was responsible for the second attempt, is 58 years old and was armed with an AK-47 style rifle and was allegedly between 300 to 500 yards away from the Republican presidential candidate at the Trump International Golf Course when members of the Secret Service spotted him and opened fire. We have a report.
In what appears to be the second attempt to kill former President Donald Trump in about 2 months, a Secret Service agent reportedly spotted a rifle barrel with a scope sticking out of a fence while the Republican nominee played a round of golf. The agents opened fire, and Ryan Wesley Routh allegedly fled the scene by car without firing any shots back. He was later detained and has been charged with 2 counts, including the possession of a firearm. Years before, Mr. Routh posted messages online criticizing Donald Trump and also showed a deep interest in supporting Ukraine in its war with Russia. In a 2020 post on X, Mr. Routh said it seemed Donald Trump was getting worse and devolving, and more recently, he suggested that Mr. Trump's campaign slogan should be "Make Americans Slaves Again." According to Federal Election Commission records in 2019 and 2020, Mr. Routh donated small amounts to the campaigns of Democratic presidential candidates, calling Joe Biden, quote, "Sleepy Joe," and criticizing him as someone who stands for nothing, no plans, no ideas, describing him to just be as limp as Hillary. Ryan Routh also displayed a sense of self-importance in messages to world leaders as early as 2020, when he tweeted repeatedly at the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. He had also in his tweets implored President Joe Biden online to send every weapon America has to Ukraine and offered President Volodymyr Zelensky advice on military strategy. And Mr. Routh's tweets to Joe Biden, Volodymyr Zelensky, and other famous figures seem to have been ignored until he was arrested in Florida this week, after allegedly waiting for the Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump, with an assault rifle outside the former president's Palm Beach golf course. On Sunday, Ryan Routh depicted himself on social media as a globe-trotting freedom fighter. Some analysts find his comments as delusional.
Now, for more on the second assassination attempt, President Emeritus, International Stability Operation Association, Doug Brooks, joins me now from Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure to be here.
So we see that the former president, that's Trump, is taking a different tone compared to the tone, where the first attempt where he called for unity. He and J.D. Vance have blamed the rhetoric of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris for the attempted assassination. I want to get your thoughts on how he's reacting to this particular attack.
Yeah, well, after the first one, everybody pushed him towards the unity idea, the idea that they would tone down the rhetoric. And for Mr. Trump, that lasted about 10 minutes, and then he was back to his usual vitriol that he uses in his regular speeches. So yes, it's been the whole campaign has been rather nasty, and even after this attempt, of course, both Biden and Harris and Walz, they all condemned the attack and said this is not the way we want to go with U.S. politics. Trump, on the other hand, if you recall, he made fun of the attack on Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's husband, and he's never really retracted that. So. And he continues to say that Harris and Walz are a danger to democracy, and that the United States will end as we know it if they are elected. So he's really not changing his tone at all. And even after 2 assassination attempts by wackos that are clearly triggered by this sort of word of this sort of rhetoric, he continues to maintain his really, really demented talk.
And they have also said the same thing about him. And by they, I mean some Democrat leaders in the Democratic Party have also said the same thing about Trump. They have said that the country would end if he wins and that he's a danger to democracy. When you put side by side both rhetoric, has that contributed?
Well, they've definitely said that yes, they've definitely said that. Attacks? You're correct that they've definitely said that Trump is a threat to democracy. Perhaps they have a bit more ground on this one because Trump has literally said he will be a dictator on day one. He's talked about tearing up the Constitution. There's a lot, and we know from the last Trump administration where he wanted to literally call the troops in to take over the voting machines and so on. Trump does not really have much respect for American democracy, so I think there's some grounds on this. Now, Trump tends to repeat the charges that he's guilty of. And we have seen that again and again and again, going from, well, the court case on his the secret documents that he stored in his bathroom, the various other court cases, the felonies that he's been convicted of. He keeps saying that, you know, others are doing the same thing, and it's absurd.
We've seen this kind of attacks in developing democracies, and when people see it in America, it's a bit shocking. But we've also seen what could happen when we saw what happened during the January 6th insurrection. Does this raise concerns about what could happen during and after the election if this kind of rhetorics are not toned down?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And even the January 6th insurrection, there weren't that many people that were armed with firearms. And as you know, there are more pistols and rifles in the United States than people. And what's kind of shocking about this latest assassination attempt is Mr. Ruth had already been convicted of a felony. Years ago, he had a illegal machine gun and was convicted of that. And he was not allowed to have a weapon. And yet here he is. He shows up with an SKS rifle with a scope and with all the numbers filed off it. Florida does have laws that allow you to carry weapons, openly. And so it's sort of hard for the police to do anything about it unless they get to a certain proximity of a target like Mr. Trump.
There has been a briefing concerning this particular attack. The Secret Service director has defended the level of security provided for Trump. And we see how Sunday's incident is raising new alarms about whether the agency can adequately protect the former president. I want to get your thought on that and whether or not his security details should be beefed up.
Yeah, well, they did beef up his security detail, and that was under the orders of President Biden. They did agree to provide more agents to support Trump's security. It was actually, I would have to say, it was very successful in this case. The alleged assassin was hiding in a bush for some 12 hours ahead of time, and the security detail was able to locate him in a bush, allegedly used by paparazzi in the past, by the way. So I guess they knew it was a location that people hide in. But they were able to discover the assassin, I guess, well before he had any clear shots at Trump. So I think the Secret Service is calling it a success and an improvement, and it seems to be.
There was a comment or a statement made by Elon Musk on Twitter, which he has, or X, which he has now deleted, and he was responding to someone who had asked a question about why the former president has been, they are trying to assassinate the former president, and then his response was, no one is even trying to assassinate Biden and Kamala, and people have, really condemned that. With this kind of statement coming in, from supporters, are you worried or concerned about copycat attacks, whether on Trump or even on Kamala?
No, absolutely. I think we all have to be concerned about that. And again, the United States has very liberal laws on weapons, so a lot of people can get them, and they can get them on short notice. and they're fairly powerful weapons. These are the high velocity weapons like the AK-47 or the AR-15 or the SKS, which doesn't have as many rounds in it, but it's a more accurate weapon. These weapons are easily available in the United States, and especially in red states like Florida, where they have very lax gun laws. And I mean, it's interesting and a little horrifying that people are allowed to carry them openly on the street. You don't see them very often, and it certainly raises eyebrows. But the fact is, there's a lot of these weapons around, and they're not that difficult to get a hold of. And yes, there's a lot of crazy people like Mr. Ruth and the previous assassin. So yes, this is something we definitely have to be concerned with for this election and those going in the future until the U.S. actually changes the way it handles its firearm laws.
So on one hand, because I've listened to you, as you respond to my questions, and you've talked so much about the gun problem. So on one hand, this is a gun problem, but on the other hand, it is also a politics and a political hate problem. And America for years has offered its brand of democracy as the model for democracy. And as you see all of this, you're an American, as you see what's going on now, what does this say about where America's democracy is today?
Let's say it is a model of democracy, not the model of democracy. I think there wouldn't be that many Americans or American political scientists that would say that the U.S. has the ultimate model of democracy. Let's face it, it's 200 some years old, and it was based on a very different system where only essentially the wealthy white class were the males were the ones that were allowed to vote, and then it's also structured in such a way that the states with less populations actually have a greater weight in the elections. And for example, it's been, I can't remember how many elections since the last time the Republicans actually won the popular vote even though they've had presidents, because of the way the system is structured. So yes, it is one form of democracy. It was a compromised democracy, a representative democracy that it's flawed, and I think anybody would agree with that. How to improve it is another question. The parliamentary systems seem to work fairly well in other countries. So I wouldn't say, and I don't think you're going to find very many Americans that will say it is the best form of democracy.
So I had mentioned earlier that some of the things we see now are the things we see with developing democracies. And so for a lot of people, it comes as a surprise because the idea is that democracy, with this kind of situations do not happen in a democracy. And so how does America continue to model democracy to the rest of the world, especially countries where you have autocratic governments?
Well, think about it this way. Democracies are inherently more free than authoritarian states, but you still have authoritarians being assassinated and shot at. But authoritarians can have more control over the weapons and over the population than you can in democracy. So for any democracy, this kind of thing is going to be a threat. The nice thing is that democracies have essentially built-in system to replace leaders for whatever reason, whether they're not doing well or whether they are assassinated. There are structures in place that allow a democratic system of replacement. With an authoritarian state, for example, in Russia, if Putin were to be assassinated or pass away, there's no real idea of exactly who or how they would replace him, because he has made sure that all his key rivals are not going to be accepted by the Russian population. So it's a mix. I think the democracies have a greater risk from this sort of thing, but they're also more robust in their ability to withstand this kind of thing. Hopefully, we don't have to see this again. The election's only coming up in November, early November, so hopefully we can get there without any more violence, and even more, hopefully, there won't be violence afterwards. If Trump loses, though, he has basically threatened to say that his supporters may want to take matters in their own hands, as they did on January 6th.
Thank you so much for your time, President Emeritus, International Stability Operation Association, Doug Brooks. Always a pleasure to have you on.